I know that while you were away, we got the news from BC Ferries on the purchase of 4 new ferries from China, which didn't go over well with a few people, including Chrystia Freeland in Ottawa. But now there's more news on that front as well.
Good old BC Ferries, the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, this developed while I was away. People were saying, oh, well, the legislature isn't sitting anymore, so it'll be quieter. It has not been quieter. So the ferries have gone to China to buy 4 new ferries. They're needed. And there's been various politicians out there kind of grandstanding and saying, well, we don't entirely approve of this. And then this week we discover that the federal infrastructure bank, this is a federal agency that funds infrastructure, is bankrolling this whole purchase. $1 billion. BC Ferries got a hell of a deal out of them. They're giving them 1.8% interest. Ferries is saying they will save $650 million on interest charges because of this deal. And this is kind of funny because last week, the federal transportation minister, Freeland, wrote a nasty letter to the BC government saying, we don't really approve of this thing. And we want assurance that BC Ferries is not going to use federal money to pay for these ferries. She doesn't mention in her letter that it's a federal agency that's bankrolling the whole purchase and is providing $650 million in infrastructure relief and interest relief to the project. So it does make Ottawa look kind of ridiculous. I see Gregor Robertson, our federal minister, is saying he wants an explanation from the infrastructure bank as to why they did this. I think that's a good question, Harold. I would have thought that a federal infrastructure bank that's lending money would be lending money for job creation and development in Canada, not helping bankroll the purchase of ships that are going to be built in China. So I don't really get the logic of this. And of course, if Robertson wants a briefing on this, he should start by asking his cabinet colleague, Freeland, why the hell she didn't mention this when she was grumbling last week, because we only learned about this when it came out this week.
Right. Okay. Well, and it doesn't appear like anyone's to the point of unraveling the deal.
No, I think it's too late. Nicholas Jimenez, the CEO of the ferries, he's given interviews, and he said, look, this isn't something that we thought up overnight. They started working on this bid, this quest for bidders for ferries 4 years ago. He said, yeah, it's BC Ferries' decision, but he said, they're not stupid at BC Ferries. They told the government what they were getting ready to do. All these politicians that are shocked that this has happened, BC Ferries board is packed with New Democrats. The chair of the board is a former NDP cabinet minister. They knew what was going on. And clearly, if they wanted to stop this and say no bids from China, they could have done that, but they should have done it some time ago. And if Ottawa didn't like the idea, why the hell are they lending them $1 billion at a very attractive interest rate? So, yeah, it's too late now. I think you'd be stuck with a big penalty clause. And Jimenez also, they haven't told us, Harold, exactly what this contract is worth, but they hinted pretty strongly. They said no Canadian companies bid. It's true. They did get bids from Europe, but the European contract would have cost almost twice as much. It would have cost $1.2 billion more. So, you take that number and you go, well, Europe was going to be twice as much as we're paying here, then probably they're paying the Chinese, I would guess, about $1.2 billion. That's what they're paying them. And as I said, they're getting the financing at a pretty attractive rate. I don't know what you're paying on your mortgage, but 1.8% is a pretty good rate. And Jimenez, again, is quite open about it. He says, we're going to save $650 million because the Federal Infrastructure Bank jumped in and provided us with the financing at a very attractive rate.
I know it's very complicated, but I'm sure many readers would look across and think, well, why don't we build these here in North Vancouver? Or why don't we build them on the East Coast? And we've built things, certainly at the shipyards in North Van, but I mean, and you say there were no bids, obviously, from Canada. But what would it take? Because obviously those would be great, well-paying jobs over a long period of time. It seems like a no-brainer to build them at home.
Well, the New Democrats have been in power it'll be 8 years this summer, and they supported the idea of building our ferries here in BC. They've been talking about it for years. What it would have taken to get us to that point would have been increasing the capacity of the shipyards here in BC. The shipyard here in BC, Seaspan says they're busy. They've built ships here in BC. BC Ferries has done maintenance work here. But you'd have had to have a plan going back now 4 or 5 years to upgrade the capacity of those yards to build here in BC. You could have, however, said that you wanted the people bidding on this contract to include commitments for a Canadian component in building the ships. You could have said, the Federal Infrastructure Bank could have said, yeah, we'll put up the money for this and bankroll it, but we want to see some Canadian content in it. Doesn't look like any of that happened. So, I mean, I agree with you. A long-term plan that upgraded the shipyards here, increased their capacity to build, that wanted at least basic Canadian content, all of that. But you can't, now that it's come out, especially when the politicians knew what was going on here, they can't pretend they didn't know this was happening. They should have known. I think at this point, the BC Ferries really needs the ships, right? In fact, they wanted to build 5 new ones, and the ferry commissioner only approved 4. So, okay, so Ferries wants 1 more ship. Well, federal government and the provincial government could get together and say, that 5th ship is needed in the long run, and we're going to ask for a Canadian shipyard to put in a bid on the 5th ship and tell us what it would take to get up to the point of being able to do that. That would be, rather than whining about how, we don't like dealing with China and, blah, 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 and we can't help it. If they really wanted to put this on a new footing, they could do that. They could say, okay, we think Ferries needs a 5th ship, and we'd like to see it built in Canada, and we're going to ask Canadian yards to put in a bid, build in Canada, what will it cost, and what will it take to get up to the capacity of being able to do that?
Right. Well, some good news for Premier Eby and his government this week with news that LNG Canada has started to produce a product in Kitimat. Now, they haven't shipped anything yet, but that's a matter of weeks away, as I understand.
Yeah, LNG is at hand. Gosh knows we've been talking about this since Christy Clark started talking about it in 2011. But yes, the big LNG Canada terminal in Kitimat is already making LNG, natural gas from northeastern British Columbia, and gas also from Alberta and Saskatchewan may come in as well, liquefying it. There's a tanker headed for British Columbia that in the next few days may come in. It'll be loaded with LNG in Kitimat, and that's the first shipment that will go out. So we're very close to this. The Premier, I think rightly this week, took credit for it. He said, this happened under the NDP, and that is true. It was under John Horgan, the Horgan NDP government, that did the deal with the investors, offered them the incentives necessary to make this happen. But it was an NDP move. When Christy Clark left office in 2017, we didn't have any firm deals. We now have one. It's built. It's the biggest private sector investment in British Columbia history. So Shell and its partners excuse me, a $40 billion project in both phases, a big pipeline that went through northern British Columbia to the northeast. And it's huge. And EB is right to take credit for it. They were thinking that they might have an event next week to sort of greet the first ship and send off the first cargo. Gather that's been put off for some reasons involving the community up there, but that's going to be happening soon. Adrian Dix, the energy minister, will be up there for the event. And they're also telling me here in the government that the premier himself will go up for an event later this year. I mean, this thing is going to go on for a while. The goal is 170 tankers a year loaded with LNG. And Shell and its partners are looking at doubling capacity up there. So I toured the site a little over a year ago. And at that point, I was shown where they would build they call LNG, they call it a train, right? But it's a production train. So 14 million, cubic meters of natural gas is the capacity of the first phase. Phase 2 is, they're already looking at it, and EB said this week that the province is working with LNG Canada to get that second phase underway as well. They're hoping that Shell and its partners will approve expansion, doubling capacity as early as next year.
Sticking with energy for a moment, the premier is less enthusiastic about bitumen through the north. There's obviously lots of discussion about that at the federal level with Bill C5, and then also with the Premier of Alberta claiming that there will be a proposal coming forward in a matter of weeks. EB hasn't said outright no, but where do you think he's at?
No, he's hedged on it. He's had kind of a series of fallback positions. So the first thing he said was we don't need a bitumen pipeline, an oil pipeline, until the existing one, TMX, is at capacity. He stopped saying that because that terminal out in Burnaby is already 1 year in, maybe 85% capacity. Like, it's busy. So EB's now saying, as you suggest, there is no firm proposal. Okay, well, you're right. The Premier of Alberta is saying, well, we can deal with that. We will have a proposal ready in a matter of weeks. EB then has said, well, and this is true, it would take a while to get a business plan together, to get environmental approval, to finalize a route, to get approval of the Indigenous communities along the routes of the pipeline. So we're some distance from, and then you got to get it built. So I think we're some distance from a firm, serious proposal yet. The New Democrats obviously support natural gas pipelines more than oil, partly because British Columbia doesn't have much oil, but also, as John Horgan once put it, John Horgan got asked, why are you supporting natural gas pipelines and not supporting bitumen pipelines? And he said, well, if a natural gas pipeline ruptures, the gas just vents into the atmosphere. If a bitumen pipeline ruptures, it pours all over the landscape and into the waterways. So there are different environmental issues involving spills, among other things. Also, there's another obstacle to shipping oil through British Columbia and out from the West Coast. The federal government has a moratorium on shipments out of the northwest coast of BC. So Ottawa would have to lift that moratorium as well. So you're right, EB isn't as sworn an enemy of as the NDP was, for example, over the TMX pipeline. But I think it's right to say that we're still some distance from a viable, approved project going ahead here in British Columbia.
All right. Over to the opposition and John Rustad. And again, I can't recall now, this might have actually happened before you went away. It's been festering for a while, but he accused some breakaway Conservatives of blackmailing, attempting to blackmail some of his staffers. And where are we at with that now? Because the
Well,
accusation's been flying around for a few
so
weeks.
the Conservatives had canceled a fundraiser in Surrey this week, and they had a caucus meeting in Surrey this week. And Rustad came out the other afternoon at the end of the day in front of his entire caucus, and he said, "We're united. We're all together." Well, those that are left anyway, the three have left. And anyway, he said, we've got it all in hand. And then he got asked about this blackmail letter. So Rustad said, well, now that I think about it, maybe I shouldn't have accused them of blackmail. He said that was just something his staff told him. And Rustad says he doesn't really want his staff talking to the police about it, and he just sort of wants it to go away. Look, he accused the breakaway Conservatives of blackmail, not once, 14 times in one letter. Blackmail is a criminal code offense in Canada. It's extortion. A person guilty of blackmail can be sent to prison for life. That's a very reckless accusation for the leader of the opposition to make toward another political party. And it's even more incredible that he's sort of not entirely backing away from it. He won't even provide the evidence. I mean, if someone's trying to blackmail you, you should be going to the cops. You shouldn't be putting out a press release from your own staff. So I don't think Rustad looks very good on this. And not surprisingly, the New Democrats have some problems out there and some issues. Not surprisingly, they've been exploiting this one and saying, well, we think the police should investigate this. It doesn't look like anything is going to come of it, but I don't think it's very flattering to Rustad's judgment that he made this accusation 14 times in the first place.
Well, yes, and I don't know. Have the alleged blackmailers or those who are being accused of it, have they said anything about whether they might go after Rustad in court?
Well, he said it's not true. He said they didn't do it. And Rustad has presented no evidence. Like we've got no evidence that, so and so called up so and so and said, if you don't give us, if you don't confirm this, we're going to come after you or whatever, right? I mean, it does take evidence to lead to a charge of, as I said, it's extortion under the criminal code. But as I said, it makes Rustad look reckless. He relied on his staff, he said, and he said he doesn't want to hang his staff out to dry. Well, you wear the accusation as party leader. You're the one who made the charge. And no, I said, I don't think it reflects very well on Rustad. And now the Conservatives are in the middle of a leadership vote at the moment. And the vote is, do you want a leadership review, which in the long run can lead to a leadership convention. We're some distance away from that. And they're doing this, they're going around the province with a ballot box that they're distributing to each of the 93 ridings in the province where all 9,000 members of the BC Conservatives can vote on this. So, we're some distance away from knowing whether this is going to amount to anything, but there are rumblings in the Conservative Party that, Rustad hasn't done as well as he should have. I would say, having watched the Conservatives in action during the spring session of the legislature, they were very effective at holding the government to account, which is one of the big jobs of the opposition. They have not been as impressive on the other job of the opposition, which is to show you're united and you got your act together and you're ready to govern. I think there's a big question mark over them on that. So, they're not doing as well on that issue as they should be as a party that came very, very close to winning the last election.
What kind of a threshold does the Conservative Constitution require for him
50 votes plus one?
Okay, but realistically, what would you need to really get to silence the critics, or at least?
Well, better than that. Rustad carried all the votes at their party convention in March. Now, they didn't have a leadership vote, but he got through all of his amendments to the party constitution, and he got through all of his policies, and his own team got elected to run the party. So he did well, but the dissidents that have left, they say, yeah, well, Rustad cooked the vote at that convention. He brought in people from outside and he paid their expenses, and they want an investigation into that. So, I mean, what you'll have to say is that whatever you think of the job the Conservatives have done holding the government to account, they're doing a hell of a job of holding each other to account. And that must be an enormous comfort to David Eby when he contemplates things like, the pediatric ward being closed at Kelowna General Hospital for 6 weeks, or more trouble on the public safety front, or the deficit, or this bizarre story on the Chinese ferries.
Yeah, or contract negotiations, which maybe we can touch on at a future date, because they're not going very well either, are they?
No, they're not. And all the contracts have now expired, and the government has put out a pay offer, 3.5% over 2 years. The unions are saying it's not good enough, but the government hasn't even got the money to pay that, never mind what the unions might think. So yeah, we're a lot of distance to be covered. There are 400,000 unionized employees in the government, 170 contracts, and 1% for everybody is by itself costs $419 million. So a government with a $10 billion deficit doesn't have the money to pay that, never mind whatever the unions might want.
Right. All right. We'll save that for another day. Thanks, Vaughn. We'll talk again soon.
Bye-bye, Harold.